It's the projects that are busy working and developing away in the background that when they come to light, you think, how did I miss this? My name is Firoz from decentralizedchain.com. Welcome to another video. If this is your first time here and you want to learn more about crypto, whether it's news, insights, or analysis to help you get that edge, start now by subscribing and clicking the bell so you do not miss a thing. Today, we are going to talk about one particular project that's received the Web3 Foundation Grant and is busy building an open network layer for Web3. It's a platform that lets users run blockchain applications in their browsers without the need for closed plugins, private APIs, and non-open infrastructures. Better still, this is going to be one of those Polkadot gems you're happy you discovered early. If you've missed a train on Near Protocol, this is a project you certainly want to pay attention to. Let's jump in. Richard, welcome to the show. Great to have you here. How are you doing?
Really well. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, look, today we're going to be talking all things Saito, and I'm pretty pumped to get into it. So, without further ado, what is it that you guys are doing over at Saito? Because it sounds like some pretty exciting stuff.
So Saito's something quite different, I think, to what most people would expect or have experienced in the blockchain space. And the problem we're really solving is how do you provide infrastructure for users in the blockchain space at scale and stay open? So obviously you can have something like Infura, which is providing support to the Ethereum network. But you've always got a question there of, is that becoming centralized? Is it already centralized? And is it sustainable for just one company to be providing all of that to the ecosystem? Saito was kind of born out of the blockchain debates, the early, sort of pre-BCH split, and that question of, how would we do what Visa does, or how would we do what Ali would do, Alipay would achieve? And our answer, at least my co-founder's answer, was always, before we get around to worrying about refactoring blockchain, before we redesign too much of that, we need to answer the question of how do we pay for all that hardware? So these things run in huge data centers.
Yeah.
And as you'll see with Infura servers, they're not small. They're not, anything to laugh at. Who's going to pay for that long term, and how is that business model going to stay open for you? So that's really what interests Saito, and we've been getting a huge reception in the Web3 space recently, because I think as projects kind of lock down their parachain slots and start looking to really servicing users, they're getting to this place where they're like, oh, we have software to index our chain and to run an API for wallets, but who's going to run that? Who's going to run the node? Who's going to do all that? And that's kind of what's getting a little bit of hype around Saito at the moment, is a solid, dyed-in-the-wool Web3 solution to that problem.
Okay. And, if I but when we sort of dig a bit deeper, what does that actually mean? As in, I get what you've gone through here, but in terms of how does an end user ultimately compute that in their head from a simple perspective? How does that actually work in practice?
So the result for end users will be actually very interesting, because they really should never see Saito in many ways. They'll be running an app that's just fantastic. It just works, does what they expect, and they won't necessarily be critically aware of what it's doing. But the difference will be, for instance, if they're archiving their communications, their email-like communications or chat or whatever on their system, they'll be able to port it to any provider. They'll own their keys, they'll have that digital identity and digital sovereignty we've come to expect from the Web3 space, from being on a blockchain, where instead of giving my identity over to the SaaS provider when I sign up and then hoping that I get a good deal out of that trade, I'll own that forever and no one will ever transgress that. So what users will see is just that they have autonomy and control over things that they're used to not having. So for instance, browsing, it may even come down to the fact that they have a transient wallet, one wallet per tab in their browser that gets trickle fed with just enough Saito to pay for the news site or whatever they're on. They never even need to worry. They don't need a special browser. They don't need anything else. If they close the tab and that kills the wallet, well, it was 2 cents that was left in there or something. It could even be set up if they wanted to just donate that somewhere. But it means you're not trackable. right? You have your sovereignty in that relationship for as long as you want, and you also have your privacy. And so that's really how we envisage things. We shouldn't have this clunky world where Web3 means going back 20 years in UX, and it means struggling with things or having to be, a skilled, crypto manipulator, user, I suppose,
exactly.
to be able to make sense of it, right? So that's really where we're coming from.
No, I mean, to that note, I do feel that we are advancing towards that. Certainly, with the emergence of Web3, one of the things that clearly been missing up until now, and it still is, I think we're getting better at it, is when you mentioned before user experience. Customers being able to just seamlessly use blockchain solutions. I don't think. Yeah. As in, I think if you're technical and you kind of get it, it's quite easy to get your head around it. If you're the everyday consumer, I don't think it is. I think there's a lot of hoops that you need to jump through, a lot of disparate systems that you need to connect in order to perform a particular task at the end of it. So I like that idea.
If you're me, or people like me, probably you, I remember sheer joy the first time it was a Bitcoin transaction, and then I committed it.
Yeah.
And then I went and looked at it on a block explorer, and that recognition of, I'm looking at the banking infrastructure. Yeah. Right. And that was really cool. I was like, I've done banking. This was, but I'm also autonomous here, and I can see the workings. So I don't need to wait for, send you a bank slip of what I did. I can send you the transaction ID. And that really gripped me. There's a lot of people who'll never care about that. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's come out of that, out of the Bitcoin ethos that is, can be true about your personal wealth, but this sort of, not your keys, not your crypto kind of mentality, stymies people for whom that's not the issue. They actually don't want to be their own banker. The idea fills them with dread.
Yes.
They also don't. The point is, they're not hosting their own Linux server, running their own autonomous file serving system, which is doable for a reasonable fee these days. It's that they're wanting to hand that over to someone because it's difficult. Yeah. So what the solution has to be something that doesn't make it difficult. They can maintain their identity for themselves, but the software can help them through any queries they have, like, how do I decrypt this? It shouldn't be like, oh, go and do this loops of steps to get back to your own data. So,
and I mean, on that point, actually, I mean, let's talk a bit about the landscape, because I suppose your approach to DPoS is slightly different, but then we also have, I suppose if we had to liken you to others within that might be taking market share, Near Protocol is one. How do you plan to kind of, I suppose, pivot yourself so others are also drawn towards Saito?
So I think, just to clarify, we're actually not DPoS. And that's part of what's different about us. We are not proof of work and not proof of stake. So Saito's consensus is its own new consensus mechanism ground up. And the reason for that is that proof of work and proof of stake pay for security via work or staking. They don't explicitly, in their consensus mechanisms, do not pay for routing, do not pay for that user infrastructure that we're interested in providing. So when you bring up a group like Near, I think they have a very similar take on, this has got to work for developers. It's got to be easy to use. And if developers are having to jump through hoops to do simple things they can do in Web 2, we're really failing them.
Yes.
So I think, and I know the guys from Near, I've met them a few times, and I think they're very much, they're to be admired for how well they've approached that stuff. I don't, think there's a better project out there, for us to compete with on saying we want to be the best experience for a developer. You couldn't look higher. But I think in the end, where we differentiate is that Saito is a network. It's not a data store. And so it allows you to develop applications in a much more, in a funny way, traditional style. Saito applications can connect up to Web 2 very easily. But the economics are right in Saito for producing a vibrant network where everybody's paid for doing something that's useful, and we're not siphoning money off to security mechanisms. So that's the really big difference with us, is, you know, we're not kind of essentially just taking user fees and giving them to people just for security. We use giving users what they need as the security mechanism, and that's very different.
And you know, if we talk a bit more about the token, because you mentioned staking earlier, and you know, I'm curious in terms of the sort of token utility that you have beyond, and I'll be completely open here, is, you know, some will be in Saito to see how much they can make, naturally, because we're in crypto, and some obviously are there for it in terms of following the vision and the sort of long-term plan, and really the developer community as well, and in terms of being able to build you know, functional solutions that they can use on Web3. So if I wasn't looking at it from a secondary market value perspective, what value does the token provide to me?
So the token is, you can think of it as a liquid AWS credit or DigitalOcean credit. Right? It's a liquid credit across any provider who wants to come in and provide infrastructure on the network. And that's the big trick. That's why it's Web3, is because anyone can come in and you can't lock them off. It's not DPoS where you have to somehow be permissioned to run a validator or something like that. It's like mining. Anyone can come and join, and anyone will be rewarded for providing value to the network. The thing we've solved that no one else has managed to solve previously, and so you can see recognition of this problem, say in Ethereum's rent, where they say, oh, we've got to pay someone for storing all this stuff. We'll make it rent, and we'll just make it this much, because that's all they can do. They don't have a measure. So what Saito has solved is said, how do you get rid of sibling and people trying to game this system, and not have things that you really can't rely on, like measuring bandwidth as the value that people are doing. So by, you know, creating Saito consensus and measuring the value of moving transactions into blocks. Basically, that's all Saito values, is moving transaction fees into blocks. By having a way of measuring that and rewarding that can't be gamed, we break out of a whole lot of problems. A whole lot of things disappear, including, for instance, the 51% attack, and, you know, Vitalik's vaunted scalability trilemma of like having to balance these things. Right? Suddenly you're free from that, and you can say, no, you can just grow, because people can come in and provide infrastructure, but they have to be helping a user somewhere. And if they can't do that, they can stand up all the nodes they want, but they're not going to get rewarded for it. So we also lose these clamps on openness, where things like DPoS require you to have a cabal of some kind that organizes exactly who can run a node, etc. So this is a kind of the needle we're threading.
So, I mean, and in terms of the needle we're threading, moving on from that, actually, I would say let's talk a bit about the team, because what's your background, Richard?
So I studied mathematics and philosophy, which is actually a lot less removed from crypto than people might imagine, in that, you know, most of that concentrated on fundamentals of computing, logic. You know, part of my philosophy course, we went to the physics department and built logic gates out of stuff. So actually, when crypto came along, I was sort of ecstatic, because the only job offer I'd ever gotten previously was the kind of standard thing that mathematics and philosophy majors get offered in Australia, which is the intelligence service comes along and says, hey, would you like a job? So when crypto came along, I was like, wow, someone actually wants to employ me for what I studied, which was a little bit new to me. So that's kind of my background, and I'd gotten from that into startup space, basically. So I'd taken different coding and then tech leadership roles in startups, and I exited my last one to join my co-founder David in Saito in 2018.
Okay. And in terms of, can you talk a bit about David's background as well?
So he's another oddball like me. He's actually some computer science background and economics. So he was studying economics at Berkeley at a graduate level when he first came to China to do a semester of study in Chinese at Tsinghua University. And we met sometime later in the Beijing startup scene. So I think if you want to look for why Saito has such a different angle, it's because we concentrated on the fundamentals, and we didn't mean technical fundamentals. It's the incentive layer, and it's right below that. And that's really down to David's background in economics, where he immediately saw blockchain scaling is related to collective action problems, and how you organize groups of people to do things when their incentives aren't aligned, etc. And that's kind of what talks to Saito at the base level, and why it's a little bit different to what you usually might see out there.
Yeah, and I mean, still on the focus of teams, I'm curious in terms of partnerships or external workings that Saito has. Is there anything you can share around that at the moment?
So, I mean, we've been building things on top of the network, that startup mentality of like make something. So you can go to /arcade on Saito.io and play games. And the reason we built those was to solve some of the fundamental technical challenges for proper peer-to-peer development, and to really test out the software. And to do that, we wanted users using something that someone built on the system. And that's really dear to us. So we have a great set of ambassadors and kind of friends of the project who we've plucked really from the basis of people who are around that space and who were, dedicating themselves a bit more to community, etc. At the same time, we just announced a collaboration today that I really hope tracks somewhere big in the future with Crust Network, and that's all about the Web3 space. And I think there's a lot of work to be done, but exciting things to happen in actually fulfilling what I was talking about at the start of being an open infrastructure layer for Web3. And that growth will come differently. That will come through partnerships and so forth. So we've got this sort of multi-layer way of moving ahead, and that's directly with developers on top of Saito, but also partnering with other blockchain teams in the space to like help them solve their problems.
And obviously on the topic of growth and sort of solving problems, I mean, let's focus a bit about your roadmap. What can we see coming up in the next quarter?
So I think there's obviously a current crop of projects. There always is in the raging bull market. Where Saito is a bit different is, says the old guy. Where Saito is a bit different is, we've got this long running set of products running on top of a good way to think about it is like Kusama, Canary Network. And the challenge for us is Saito is every decision in Saito is an economic balance. We don't hard code things like transaction size or the number of nodes or anything like that. That should be an economic balance, right? There should be as many nodes in the network as are profitable. Where that comes down to a kind of roadmap question is, we've got all of that, but how do you kickstart that economy? If everything's economic, you need a token with real value to pay people to support them to run the hardware that's going to be your network, that then lets people put their content or whatever else it is on top of a website built on that, and have an auction site for their NFTs, etc. For all of this to work, it needs token value. So basically, we're looking at a public sale, and we'll have announcements about that reasonably soon, start of April. And the whole point of that is to kickstart that motor, that engine, because for us, mainnet is not. Mainnet's a state of mind. It's a matter of community more than technology. And the challenges between us and mainnet are more community based than technological. In that, a proper network has a vibrant community running nodes, and the protocol in essence is really defined by everybody agreeing and having consensus on node updates. So we very much hope in the not too distant future, there are a bunch of implementations of the core protocol suiting IoT devices, data centers, browsers, and they'll be in different languages, etc. And that it's a community agreeing to keep working to that standard that is in fact the network. To get there, it's that bootstrapping problem. And so our roadmap really is focusing on that. And that's all, it's sort of, to kickstart something, you need to be, it's a circle, and you need to have all of the parts of circle in mind, right? So we need to be looking at getting those partnerships working, supporting developers, getting a token price, having people running nodes, etc. And getting that into place. And also, funnily, things like talking to advertisers. We should be getting the first people advertising or offering ads to developers to say, well, you can have Saito from me, or I'll buy Saito from you to give to users, which I'll give back to you for using services. We want to sort of really focus on getting that sort of thing happening. We've got a couple of contacts in that space, but this is kind of unknown territory in many ways for blockchains. So there's a lot of work to do as well. It's exciting, but a lot of work.
No, clearly. I mean, it's interesting you touched on community, because community. When I look at community, I talk about everyone kind of supporting the Saito vision and Saito journey, and certainly within this space that we're in, communities pretty much, I would say, make or break projects in general. If you don't have enough of a robust community behind you, your brand advocates to talk about it, I sometimes feel that it is quite difficult to get off the ground for any projects. And given the nature of Saito, because like we were discussing earlier, an end user may not necessarily see Saito, they will be using a byproduct of Saito more than anything else. So it sort of leads me to ask the question is, how do you evolve the community around Saito? Because until you grow that community, I would say to a certain extent, I'm not going to say it's difficult to get off the ground, but clearly word of mouth and spreading and awareness and brand advocates and ambassadors are an important part of this ecosystem. So I'm just curious, where does your strategy lie in terms of how you grow and engage the community?
I mean, there's a couple of layers to that. I mean, fundamentally, come talk to you. We have to get out there. We have to engage the community and the broader space through getting out there, talking about what we're doing, trying to excite people, motivate people. The cool thing is that at the heart of what we're doing is some genuinely interesting new you want to say tech, but it's more fundamental than that. It's methods.
Yeah.
And everybody hopefully remembers how they felt when they worked out how proof of work worked. There's that thing when they saw Bitcoin or whatever their first real crypto experiences were. I was talking before about seeing the Block Explorer was one of the first times I realized what was going on here, and got excited about it. And the cool thing with Saito is when you understand the consensus mechanism, it's really simple, and it suddenly flips a lot of what you thought about blockchain, or at least assumed, on its head. And so when we get people interested and excited, they come around really hard. And if you look at, we hired a head of development. We brought someone new on, I think November last year, and he wrote a fun piece about why he joined.
Yeah.
And it was, we kind of obviously we've known him from the Beijing crypto space for a long time, etc. But kind of red pilling him and then seeing it take off and watching him realize, like, why, how does everybody not see this? And this is, and that's really cool. So that's a huge part of, I think, what we can offer is really there's a lot to get your teeth into, and it's interesting stuff. And if you like crypto for the various reasons people do, there's something there for you. And I think that's really what we're trying to get the message out. So we don't want to go blindly. We want to come on something like this and talk about real things.
Yeah.
And we hope people recognize that, and they can see, oh, there's something really interesting going on there. I want to find out more. And then they come along, they hop on Telegram and say, oh, there's a community and they're a bit wacky. That's interesting, and it goes from there.
Sounds like the great formula, to be honest. And I think on that note, really, before we wrap up, Richard, where do people need to go to find out more about Saito?
So we're at Saito Official. Let me get the exact Telegram link. So
I'll put them in the description below.
Saito.io. Yeah. So Telegram's a great place to start, basically, because there's always people about, and there's that early community, that kind of ambassador group there who'll gladly point you at whatever thing it is that you're interested in. Obviously, Saito.io, the website as well. And just skip the boring stuff. Go to /arcade and play something. Like, there's a community there. There's on-chain chat, so you can just hop on, creates a wallet automatically, and you can start playing, strategy games or card games, etc., with people pretty instantly, and be studying crypto at the same time. So you can be doing proper market research and have some fun.
Fun way to learn. Well, Richard, look, thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to the launch of Saito, actually, and all the best with your public launch in April. And let's circle back once we're a bit further down the road.
I'm glad to. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Richard. Speak to you soon. Bye bye.